Destoroyah, the Titanic Precambrian horror. Monster X, ultimate weapon of the Exilians. Each of these merciless titans ended their respective era within the Godzilla franchise, but if they were to cross paths, which would prove the deadlier foe? To decide which of these two would come out on top in a battle of micro-oxygen mutated might and gravity-defying power, I ask, what if Destoroyah fought Monster X? For this theoretical fight, I'm primarily looking at just the films, and other Godzilla-related media. I won't be pulling more ludicrous stat feats or quotes from guides, for example, as I feel stat calculations can get rather crazy when compared to the original films, so things like Meltdown's beam having infinite heat will be thoroughly ignored. So with that said, let's dive in. Now for this fight, Destoroyah, or Destroyer as I'll probably say more often than not, will start off in his 80,000 ton, 120 meter tall final form as seen in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. He'll be able to divide and reconstitute himself once, just like in the film, and as for his abilities, he'll have access to his classic moveset. First off, the micro-oxygen beam, or oxygen destroyer ray, is a concentrated and corrosive blast of micro-oxygen, which used the same power which originally mutated the Precambrian lifeform, that being Dr. Yamane's oxygen destroyer. In regard to potency, in his juvenile forms, the beam could shred fish to their bones or blast a hole clean through a human. When further developed, Destoroyah's beam easily knocked around Junior when Destoroyah was in his aggregate form, tore through countless Japanese self-defense force vehicles as the beam is specifically able to burn through metal, and most impressively, knocked around Meltdown Godzilla, easily Heisei's strongest and ultimately final form. There's also speculation that the micro-oxygen beam burned a hole through Meltdown Godzilla, but the footage as seen here is a bit subjective. The ray tends to skitter back and forth when you slow down the footage, so when applied to the sequence, it could be argued the beam is just moving side to side. As for this quote-unquote feat, I really don't buy it as there's no scar left on Godzilla, unlike what was left by what I'd argue is Destoroyah's most famous technique. The variable slicer or horn katana is Destoroyah's most lethal attack. Supercharging his horn, he swings the protrusion down like an energized blade, cleanly cutting through Meltdown Godzilla and leaving a gnarly scar. While only used once, the damage done was horrendous, and if not for Meltdown's insane healing factor at this point, probably would have killed a lesser form of the King of the Monsters. Other potent abilities include being able to drain his opponents of energy through his prehensile pincered tail, infect his enemies with micro-oxygen that'll drain his prey of power, split into dozens of aggregates and reform into a new body, and unleash a stomach beam that never made it to the film so won't be used here. But come on, look how cool this is. How could I not bring it up? Then on the physical side of things, Destoroyah can fly, use any number of claws, teeth, or spikes across his body, and toss opponents around with his prehensile tail with ease. He's a death-dealing, oxygen-destroying juggernaut, and while low tolerance to high and low temperatures ultimately did him in, he did manage to put up a fight against a Godzilla spewing nothing but red spiral atomic rays. Any foe that crosses paths with this horrific hive mind is in for some serious trouble. Now for a worthy adversary, look no further than Monster X. Deployed as Exilian's 10th and final monster against Godzilla in the film Godzilla Final Wars, Monster X took to the battlefield within the monstrous meteor Gorath, creating a near-nuclear explosion just from his entrance. Then he proceeded to mostly get pummeled by Final Wars Goji, but amidst the beatdown, he did show to be physically on par with Godzilla and even on par power-wise when using his spiraling energy blast, the destroyed thunder beams. Those gravity beams matched Godzilla's atomic breath, made a Godzilla that never took a serious hit in the whole film kneel, and created this gargantuan explosion. But while potent, Monster X seemed to rely mostly on melee with punches, tail swipes, and other hand-to-hand techniques. Like I mentioned earlier, his physical attacks weren't that effective, but when covered in a thick bone-white dermal armor, he can take hits other monsters of the film just couldn't. That is, until he transformed into the 100,000 ton Kaiser Ghidorah, which yes, will be allowed in this fight. Losing his speed and immense durability came with a buff in height from 120 to 140 meters and the upside of immense power. The anti-gravity beams proved Godzilla's atomic rays better and tossed the 55,000 ton combatant with relative ease. Now this solid feat could be even better if you consider that the rays, while not only immensely powerful, negate gravity's effects on the target, meaning larger opponents could be thrown around just as easily. Sadly, while immensely powerful, the costs of the transformation quickly caught up to Kaiser Ghidorah. Like I mentioned earlier, the lack of armor that had tanked most of Godzilla's earlier attacks allowed the Atomic Leviathan, once he got his own power boost from from the human-mutant hybrid Shinichi Ozakai to turn the tide relatively quickly. If a single anti-gravity bolt could decapitate a head, and Kaiser Ghidorah's 3 beams were just a bit stronger than base form Godzilla's own beam, then it wouldn't take much to assume a single anti-gravity bolt would be less than Godzilla's standard atomic ray. What I'm saying is, if Godzilla's first blast had landed, he may not have even needed the power-up. Really reminds me of Batra, very impressive first form that sacrifices armor for power and agility, only to die by a wound the first form would have easily shrugged off. So with each side's strengths, powers, and weaknesses quickly summarized, where do I see this what if going? Well, in a battlefield that doesn't favor any side, so no deep ocean so Destoroyah could try to atomize Monster X from inside out like the aquarium fish, I think Monster X will actually do surprisingly well against Destoroyah. Now, the destroyed Thunder Beams, even with their impressive showings, can't match the type of firepower Meltdown Godzilla was throwing around. Also, Monster X is only slightly heavier than Meltdown, so I think if Destoroyah got his tail around the alien's neck, Monster X would be in for a tough time. That is where Monster X's innate negatives of the matchup end though. His speed should allow him to evade the Visceral Blade and maneuver around Destoroyah's less agile form. His multiple showings of durability with the Gorath explosion or atomic gravity beam lock also demonstrate that Destoroyah will need to use a lot of power to put Monster X on the back foot. A challenge that may prove that much more daunting due to one fact of Monster X's biology that I haven't referenced, being his alien biology. Now, Ghidorahs are from space, a shocking revelation, I know, but I bring this up because as seen in something like Godzilla King of the Monsters, a version of the Oxygen Destroyer did absolutely nothing to King Ghidorah because of his otherworldly origins. He wasn't a life form which relied on or needed oxygen, so it did nothing to him. Even if you buy the resistance, I'm not saying the Oxygen Destroyer Ray will do nothing either, as micro-oxygen's corrosive effects did extend outside of organic material, like metal, but it did fail to dissolve bone. We see this with the fish in the original Godzilla skeleton, which would certainly help the dermal armored alien. If you add on Monster X's impressive durability feats and give Monster X a moderate resistance to the Oxygen Destroyer beam, then this first round will be a very, very tedious fight. Honestly, with each monster having a liking to inflict pain on their adversaries, this fight would be like locking 2 masochists in a room together and each can't feel pain. There's no enjoyment here, only fury. As for who falls first, I'd lean Monster X unless you buy the high end of my resistance theorizing. In that case, if Destoroyah breaks down, then Monster X shouldn't have too much of an issue smashing the smaller forms before Destoroyah reforms and the alien warrior reaches his limit, transforming into Kaiser Ghidorah. But let's assume a minor resistance and Monster X transforms first into Kaiser Ghidorah, blasting Destoroyah to bits. The smaller forms would be a challenge to his draconic alter ego, maybe even resulting in some friendly fire. It's tougher, but I don't think Kaiser will eventually get overwhelmed with 3 heads able to fire the incoming horde. Kaiser could also absorb the small fry's energy or stomp them on the ground until Destoroyah's final form shows back up. So Kaiser Ghidorah versus Destoroyah. Who wins? Well, for the 2 titanic powerhouses, the one that can dictate the battle and he who possesses more power should come out on top. Both of those categories go squarely to Kaiser. If Destoroyah lands the first hit, he could cripple the dragon, but in Final Wars, Godzilla actually managed to shoot first and Kaiser was quick enough on the draw to block the atomic blast, making that possibility for Destoroyah landing the first hit remote. Now, if Destoroyah got close, the Abomination could take a head or 2 with the Visceral Blade, but the anti-gravity effects of Kaiser Ghidorah's bolts mean the dragon can toss him away without much effort, or at least keep Destoroyah on the back foot, leading to the hive mind's eventual atomization. An atomization that will admittedly take longer since Destoroyah lacks a direct weakness to Kaiser's gravity beams. Overall, I'd give this fight fairly reliably to Monster X, especially if the resistance to micro-oxygen holds up. His immense durability, solid firepower, and dermal armor, when coupled with his evolved form's gravity-defying power, should net him more victories than not. However, Monster X can lose this if he's not careful. The Visceral Blade is Destoroyah's best way to win. Swarming Monster X as he transforms or hitting Kaiser Ghidorah before he's ready to fight could also net wins, but those outcomes would be more rare by comparison. So do you agree with my analysis? Think things would have been different? Well, that's great. This is just my opinion after all, with a bit of research thrown into for support. But if you did enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. I'm GrayShot151 of What If Kaiju, and I will catch you all next time. Until then, later.